Well, hey, this is James Riley.
And Beth Riley.
And we've got a new edition of our Artist Spotlight podcast series. And Beth, who we have?
Well, today we have the pleasure of speaking to, all the way from Canada, Mark Malibu from Mark Malibu and the Wasagas.
How you doing, Mark?
Hey, Jam and James. Hey, Bop and Beth. So nice to finally talk to you, not just have to type out a message on the old messenger there. Very nice to meet you.
Good to talk to you.
Yeah, super nice to meet you. Now, let's go way back with you. Who shaped your music sound and who is part of the Mark Malibu musical DNA?
Well, when we moved to Canada, it was in the late 60s, and I was a teeny weeny, just a baby. But the Beatlemania was going strong, so my mom used to listen to the radio all the time. So everything was Beatles and the Supremes, and so the late 60s. But my dad, who worked at General Electric, bought a record player. I have an older sister. Everyone needs an older sister or brother to get some good records. So we were in a hardware store and they sold records because records were selling everywhere in the 60s. And she convinced my mom to buy the first Monkees album. And there's a Beatles album called Twist and Shout that was only released in Canada. So those were our first two records for years. So the Beatles and the Monkees were absolutely everything to me. What people forget is the Beatles were released in Canada before America, 6 months before. And Capitol Records in Canada were not that enthused by the Beatles, but there was a record executive there who said, I think this Beatles thing is going to be big. So he came up with a series of records called Capitol 6000 series, and he released the Beatles and their different arrangements and the actual American and UK versions of the albums. And they were releasing 3 of those a year. And then he brought in the Dave Clark 5 and Jerry and the Pacemakers. So all that was released in Canada before America.
I'm glad you brought up the Monkees, too. I mean, obviously, I think most everybody loves the Beatles, and it's Global Beatles Day coming up in June, so that's pretty cool. But the Monkees, man, I don't think they ever get the recognition they deserve.
I mean, the Beatles were released in 63, 64, where the Monkees were coming out in 67, but they were neck and neck in the charts. They were knocking each other out of number one position. And you would have these polls, who's bigger, the Monkees or the Beatles? In the end, the Beatles obviously won out. They had a larger body of work. They weren't a band that was put together by a record producer, Don Kirshner. But the Monkees made an awful lot of really great music during their fame and after. Even you think about it, Linda Ronstadt's first hit, March to a Beat of a Different Drum, was written by Mike Nesmith when Linda Ronstadt had the Stone Ponies. They were really solid songwriters, so they deserve far more respect than they get.
Do you have a favorite member of the Monkees?
I think it always changed. I always liked Peter because he was goofy, but I always found that Mickey Dolenz sang on all the songs I liked the most. I love Stepping Stone. We used to do that in the Wasagas. In fact, even recently when we did some shows, I played organ and we did Stepping Stone. So that's probably my favorite Monkees song. But, I love them all. They're wonderful. Mike Nesmith is a genius, and just, even his film he did, Elephant Parts, was brilliant. And of course, he produced Repo Man, which is one of my favorite films.
Now, you're promoted as Canada's original surf punk instrumentalist. Let's go back to when you were around initially, 1979, 1982. Describe what the music scene was like during that time. I can't imagine there was a huge surf scene at that time.
There was zero surf scene anywhere, honestly. I was in England in 1977 as a young boy, and I kind of saw the punk scene exploding. So when I came home, I kind of asked my friends, is there anything here? And my one friend, Grant, said, yeah, there's some punk bands in Toronto. So we would go downtown and rip their posters off the walls and try and find their 45s. So I wanted to start a punk band, but, when you're 14 or 15, all your friends are listening to Aerosmith and Supertramp and bands like that. So I had to kind of recruit and show people how to play instruments. And eventually we got a band called the Degenerates together. And we played in our high school and basement parties and whatnot. It wasn't a punk band in the sense of what most people think a punk band is, because we were really playing songs from the 60s. A bunch of things happened. I decided to turn it into a full-on surf instrumental band. So around 1980, we were kind of all going instrumental. 81, we played our first shows, full instrumental. And we were still underage, but I would book us into bars and lie about our ages. I always say, It's way easier to do something and apologize than actually ask for permission. You've heard that a million times before. Yeah. So that's always my motto. Just go and do it. And if they kick you out or they get mad at you, it doesn't matter. I've already done it. You can't fire me from a job I've already done.
Yeah. It's interesting. We were talking to Bob Berryhill about this too, of the punk scene and the surf scene being so closely related. Why do you think that is? You kind of answered it some with what you were wanting to do initially, and then it became surf. But it seems like people that are fans of punk may discover surf, or vice versa.
I think that a lot of the surf bands in the early 60s were kids as well. They were 15, 16, 17 years old. You can quickly put together an instrumental band because you got to remember, when you're a guy is 15, our voices are changing. We can't sing. We can barely talk. To put together an instrumental rock and roll band that could play a school dance, they probably have played 10 or 15 instrumentals, and then they would have done some standard rock and roll songs and sung them. You'll see a lot of the early rock and roll bands did some instrumental, and they did some vocals because they had to play a school dance or a community center dance, and they'd have to play 2 sets or 3 sets. So punk was the same thing. We'd been long suffering through the Emerson, Lake and Palmers and bands like Led Zeppelin. Like, how does a 14-year-old kid stand up to Jimmy Page, who's playing those mind-blowing lead guitar solos? I was a pretty good guitar player, and I could play some of that stuff, but not at that level. But you could easily put together a band that played the Ramones and the Monkees and the Beatles, and Tommy James and the Shondells, and you actually sounded pretty darn good. So I think the punk ethos was a lot like the garage band ethos and the surf band ethos. It was just like anyone can put a band together and, maybe by accident write a good song. And that's how they're all kind of connected.
You guys reunited rather, in about 2014, which we definitely want to talk about too. What happened between 1982 and 2014, and how did the reunion come about?
Okay, so when high school ended for us, we all kind of went in different directions. Our bass player became very involved in the hardcore scene and played in some very big hardcore punk bands. Steve went on to drum with some more kind of new wave and new romantic and then 80s rock bands. And I did get pulled into a band with him, another band called Directions East, where we did some good recordings. We sounded a bit like Simple Minds meet U2, but I was really not looking to stay in the music business. Out of high school, I got a job in a music store, and I noticed all these guys I'm working with that were in their 40s and 50s that had really successful bands, no money to show for it, and we're now working in a music store. And I kind of thought, this is not where I want to end up in my 40s and 50s and 60s. So I kind of looked around the music store and I saw the guys that were making real good money in music were doing soundtracks for TV shows, films, music for TV commercials. So I thought, and at that point I was actually at the music store. I wasn't in the guitar department. I was in the music software department because I was a musician and I had always had a keen interest in computers. So I decided I'm going to use this music store as a place to meet composers. And I went from there to assisting composers to being recommended to be a sound editor on a TV show. And you have no idea what a financial jump that is. I go from making $250 a week to $1,200 a week as a young guy. And I thought, okay, there's a career here. And then I just kind of worked my way up to picture editing. I've done some writing. I've done some directing. I've done some producing. So I worked my way through the film business and had a really great career to the point of being comfortable. When I stopped traveling for work, I started to go and sing bands again. And that's when I went to the surf battles they had in Toronto. And some of the guys there remembered me from the Wasagas. They kept on saying, you got to reunite, you got to reunite. And so finally in 2014, we did. And people liked it. And suddenly they said, hey, we're playing in Montreal. We're going here. So we're out on the road after doing just this reunion show, which I thought was like a one-off. So I thought, well, I think I can drag this along for a few years. And now it's been 10 years.
You guys release quality projects every time. Do you set out to do a certain theme, or do songs kind of come to you and then you realize, hey, this is a record, or is it a little bit of both?
Well, I write a lot. I'm always writing. I'm always dropping ideas on the iPhone. And then from the iPhone, I sit and I demo them, just drum programming and me playing all the instruments. And then I kind of assess the songs I've written. And just maybe about 3 weeks ago, we went in the studio and dropped down 18 new songs. I don't know if there's an album there. I mean, it's enough number-wise, but is it thematically, does it work? Is it interesting enough across those 18? I don't know. Those are old songs to me. I wrote them 2 years ago. I already have another 25 in the bin for the guys to learn. So I'm thinking after we do a few shows with a bit of traveling, we're going to start working on the new stuff. And then if I have like 30 or 40 songs, I'll start shaping them into albums. I mean, I know that's a ridiculous amount of songs to be talking about, but after doing 4 or 5 albums, I can't remember what we've done now. I don't want to take a step back and just release a whole bunch more stuff. There's nothing worse than an album of stuff. I want to release an album and say, wow, this is even better than the last one. Yeah, and I don't know what that'll take, but I'm bound and determined to make sure the next one's even better than whatever we've done before.
So what can people expect to see at a Mark Malibu and the Wasagas show?
Well, I try and have very modular shows because I never know, are we going to have a go-go dancer? We have a friend sometimes that dresses up like a gorilla and plays bongos with us. So it's pretty fluid. When the band rehearses, we rehearse songs in blocks. And then when we have a show coming up, I'll tell them, oh, we're going to do a limbo dance in the middle, competition in the middle of this song, or this is going to be a twist competition, or I'm bringing up these people for here. And they kind of have to expect the unexpected with me in the band. So you could come and see us 4 times and it'll be 4 different shows.
Probably my favorite thing about this interview is going to be this right here. And that is about the radio liners that you did for our shows. And those are quite possibly the funnest radio liners we've ever gotten. But has anyone ever told you that you sound like Shaggy from Scooby Doo?
That is the most ultimate compliment. Thank you. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a front person. I had to learn how to be a front person. I've always hated my voice to the point of whenever I've tried to sing, I've kind of like gone, Gah! I really believe in pushing myself into unknown territory all the time. So with my previous band, before I got the Wasagas back together, the Millwinders, I was just singing backup. And I noticed a lot of my singing to me was substandard. So I started taking singing lessons. And that helped me be a better backup singer. And now I kind of have the confidence to do some lead singing. No, I'm not Pavarotti, but it doesn't sound too bad. It's rock and roll, so it can kind of stink a little bit. When I did the radio show, the Mark Malibu Surf and a Go-Go radio show, it was also a challenge for me because I had to get used to hearing my voice a lot. And I still think I sound like Mickey Mouse, but it kind of came together. And you have to own your voice, whatever it is. Just be the best voice it can be. I like being compared to Shaggy.
Hey, that's Casey Kasem, man.
Exactly. I grew up listening to his show on the radio.
And the fun thing about that is my sister Kara, her nickname that I gave her a long time ago, and I don't know how I gave it to her initially, but I know she was a huge fan of Scooby Doo. So I started calling her Scoopster.
I used to watch Scooby Doo all the time. My parents would go shopping on Saturday mornings and they would drop my sister and I off at a bowling league. By the time the bowling league got done, Scooby Doo was on TV at the bowling lane. So we'd sit there watching Scooby Doo, waiting for my parents to turn up. So it was kind of part of our weekend.
Man, tell us about these great Surfin Kitty Xmas compilations. I think there's 4 so far. Are you going to keep this going?
Every year I say that's the last one, but I think there's going to be a number 5 for sure. I've decided upon that. Once again, Wasagas being a high school band, we still have some very close friends. So our friend Chris May, who we went to high school with, got married and they moved their horses down to Grand Bahamas. They do eco rides down there in the Grand Bahamas. It was for tourists. So no sooner they got down there and there was a massive hurricane that wiped out the island. Half the island was underwater. People just basically left the island and they left everything behind. So they found people had even just abandoned their pets. And there was dogs and cats all over the place, starving. They were wounded. It was a bad situation. So they just started bringing all these dogs and cats back and having the island veterinarians come in and vetting them and feeding them using their own money, which, after that it's not like you have a lot of spare money after you've gone through a hurricane. So my friend Steve, who drums in the band, and I went down to visit Chris, and it was wonderful. I'd be sitting in the horse stables and I'd be surrounded by like 120 cats, and they would just be crawling. Steve's allergic, so he's got to keep his distance. And I'm loving this. There's cats crawling all over me. I came back and I thought we need to do something just to raise a little bit of money for their costs. Every year, we usually raise about $2,400. Every band on the CD is donated a Christmas song. I pay for the pressing and all the mastering, everything out of my own pocket. So whatever comes in for this charity, 100% of it goes to the money for feeding and neutering and bedding the cats. So I think it's well worth it. It's a little thing that I do that I feel good about. I'm a big animal lover. We have couple dogs in the house are truly spoiled. So there will be a number 5. So any surf bands listening out there, even if you're not a surf band, but you're surf adjacent, if you want to send us an original Christmas song, I'd be happy to put it on the CD.
You heard it first here.
I want to backtrack. Let's talk about the Wasagas, the other members of Mark Malibu and the Wasagas. Who are the Wasagas?
Well, Steve, our drummer, is the longest serving Wasaga with me. It was in his basement we decided to turn the punk band into a surf band. We've always been best musical friends. We really work well together. We challenge each other to be better all the time. I mean, when we were kids, our gear was junk. He got drums really out of people's garages and ready to be thrown out. And he was a smart enough guy to put the kit together and make it functionable. And we just played so many house parties and bars together and traveled together. So when I decided to do the reunion, I thought I will do the reunion if original members come back. So Steve was in, Grant, who was in the band, he came back, and then Buzz, the bass player, he came back. But, after, I don't even know how many years it was like 34 years. People are busy doing things, so I had to kind of retool to get the band going in the right direction. But Steve has been the constant member since day one, my drummer. About a year and a half ago, I changed a couple band members. So I have a new bass player, Rick McConnell, who I've known for a long time in the scene. He's our new bass player. And we got Fast Mike on rhythm guitar. And when I made that difficult decision to change 2 members, I sat up, I couldn't sleep. I sat up one night and I said, I'm going to make a list of bass players, guitar players, who I think would be good. So I made a list of 6 bass players and 6 guitar players. And then I put them in numerical order, my first, second, and third choice, etc. And wouldn't you know it, I was going to the bank the next morning and I run into Rick. And I see him, I said, by the way, I said, I have decided I'm going to change some members. Are you up to? And he goes, I'll play bass. I said, you were going to be my first choice. So I hired him in front of my bank. And then I reached out to Mike and he said yes. So then became the painful process of learning years and years of music plus new stuff. They've really worked hard to integrate themselves into the Wasagas. And I think right now this lineup is I know every band member says that, but truly this band is the best version of the Wasagas that's ever existed.
That's awesome, man. You've seen lots of changes, and like with every scene, whether it's rockabilly or folk or anything, it goes through changes and sounds. How do you view the surf scene today?
I think it's really varied. In every scene, there's a group of traditionalists, and they always say, you got to use these kind of guitars and these kind of amps, and you got to play these kind of songs. And then you have bands that veer from that. And in surf, you have some bands that are a bit more heavy metal. You have some bands that are a bit more prog. You have some bands that are a bit more horror influenced. I like the variety. Traditionalists are important because you can't move forward if you don't know your past. But the thing that's always been in my mind was surf. Surf was really cutting edge. I mean, they were the ones that were going to Dick Dale, how do we make the best amp for surf? How do we make the most powerful amp? How do we put a reverb in here that's going to sound like the sound you want? How do we make a guitar that has the right outputs and the right sound? So that was cutting edge guitar technology. I sometimes have a problem when we say, now we got to stop. In 1963, that was the sound. We can't change from there. But I realize the importance of traditionalists, because without that kind of line in the sand, you don't know how far you're going. I personally like all of it. I'm not a huge fan of maybe some of the metal-y, progressive-y surf, but that's me. I'm stuck in the 60s. Not necessarily in our sound, but in my way of thinking. I love it all. I mean, there's so many great bands, and they're all over the world. It's not just, some crazy teenagers in California anymore.
I am exactly the same way. I definitely feel the importance and someone with a purist approach to it, because I do think that it helps everybody understand our history, which is important. I guess just coming from Kentucky, we didn't have beaches or, an ocean or palm trees. And so it was like a fantasy world to me. And so I didn't compartmentalize the different styles. It was all just one big thing. And I think that's kind of how I approach it myself, too.
Well, we see that still with rockabilly. So you'll see some really traditional rockabilly bands or country swing bands. Then there's also psychobilly, and there's some great psychobilly bands, but that's very far removed from rockabilly, even like the wildest rockabilly, that happened in the late 50s. But I love it all. I can easily listen to Big Sandy as much as a band like Mad Sin,
Absolutely. It's all part of it.
Yep.
What is new on the horizon for Mark Malibu and the Wasagas, or just you?
I'm always talking about myself. The band, like I said, we have 18 songs in the studio. The drums and the bass and the rhythm guitar, those tracks are done. I've just been in my studio here playing with how I want to record the lead guitar. I was happy with the lead guitar sounds on the last few records, but I think I can do better. So I have some different mics, and I'm just working on one song right now, and I've recorded about 6 different recording methods. And I think I'm going to go in and mix it and then make a determination of what the recording style will be for the next songs. Just so I can just start laying down I can play them, and I just need to do it. But I'm just looking for the lead guitars to have a much better sound than the last few records. And that takes time. I've switched in and out amps. I've switched mics. So anyway, it's a very long, boring way of saying, I want the next record to be better.
This will be a fun one. And this can just be for today, because I know it can change. If you had to go away, this is the infamous Desert Island Disc question, because they're always just fun to think about. Okay, if you only could take 3 to 5 albums with you, what would you take if you had to go today and you just had to grab a few? What would you take with you?
My first 2 records, so it would be the Beatles' Twist and Shout album, more of the Monkees, that has Stepping Stone on it. The Ramones, I'm not sure which album, probably Leave Home. That's the one I've been listening to a lot. I absolutely love the Cars' first album. And then, maybe the Nuggets compilation, the Psych Garage compilation. I know there's 2 records in there, but I'm going to count that as one.
A record I didn't hear you mention, or an artist that I didn't hear you mention, was one by Jackson Browne. Are you a Jackson Browne fan?
I remember my sister buying me a Jackson Browne LP. The last song on the album had his version of Stay, which I thought was brilliant. I wasn't sure if it was a live version or not. And maybe that was running on empty. Was that the album?
Yeah.
That's the one my sister gave to me. And that was kind of the music she listened to when I was listening to all my crazy wild stuff. And normally she would give me stuff and I wouldn't listen to it. But that Jackson Browne album I thought was pretty high quality.
And what is your sister's name?
Jackie.
Jackie, shout out to you.
Hey, as you can tell, Beth's a big Jackson Browne fan.
Well, they made a lot of great music.
So you're an avid record collector too. We've talked about this. What kind of things are you usually searching for when you go into a record store?
Well, I really collect original pressings from the early 60s, late 50s and early 60s. and I have a high bar when it comes to buying stuff. I realize like the record sellers always going, that record is 60 years old. I mean, this is good for 60. I go, I'm going to wait until I find it in excellent condition, cover and record. And I drive them crazy. But I have record collector friends who come over and they go, oh my gosh, your records look like they just came from the department store. I go, yep. And it's all from the 50s and 60s. So I'll pay big money for something if it's in great condition. So I have all the early Beatles and Jerry and the Pacemakers and Freddie and the Dreamers. And I just got a nice, super clean copy of the Zombies first album. So I'm always looking for something special like that. And I also am a heavy collector of early Canadian rock and roll. So I have those, and they're really rare because they just didn't get pressed too much.
There's definitely a list of stuff that we look for, but we definitely tend to hit the dollar bin just because it's more of a challenge. Like, what could possibly be in here? And typically you find the usual, Jim Neighbors gospel albums or whatever, but sometimes you really find some great stuff.
I don't even go to the dollar bin. Nothing I want is $1. Nothing I want is $40. I've almost stopped going to record shows in Toronto because they jacked the prices 3 times.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll drive like an hour and a half, 2 hours out of the city to go to a record show there. I just recently got a super clean copy of David Clayton Thomas and the Shays. He was an R&B singer in Toronto, and there was a great go-go rock and roll joint on the main street here on Yonge Street, and he did this album there. And it's all rock and roll standards. It's so hard to find it in great condition, and I finally found one, and I negotiated with the guy a bit and frustrated the heck out of him. And I said, I'll come back and I'll let you think about it. And of course, at the end of the day, he hadn't sold it. It was too valuable. So I worked out a good deal. So I finally have that album. So you got to check it out. David Clayton Thomas and the Shays. If you Google that album cover, you're going to say, that's the ultimate go-go album. One of the go-go dancers from that LP on the front cover, she ended up being my waitress at my local restaurant that I lived next to for 30 years. And she was so well known in the city as Toronto's longest serving waitress. She'd tell me all these great stories, about her hanging out with Mick Jagger and everybody. She was a real gem to the city. I haven't seen her in years now.
Another fun question we like to ask, it's probably my favorite, is about a time machine. You know how people like to do their time travel thoughts, right? Well, if you could go back in time or forward in time, what decade would you want to go to?
Well, I lived in a bunch of decades already. Well, I'll tell you something kind of cool. So I've been doing my ancestry DNA, and my dad's side of the family is Roma Gypsy. And I've just discovered a painting, I guess it would be like my 4th great grandfather, Thomas Hearn. And basically they were Roma Gypsies living in gypsy caravans in England, and they were known as chairmenders. So it'd be cool to go back and see them. They'd probably think I was a total freak, and who knows what they'd do to me. But it was kind of interesting to find that history of my family, because I'd heard about it, but now I'm just kind of starting to discover it, because the Hearn family is the largest Roma Gypsy family in all of England. And that was my grandmother. And, back then they would have 10, 12 kids each. So, and the records are not very good because it's Roma Gypsy records, which is just handwriting and stories and whatnot. So maybe I'd go back to 1874 that the painting's from.
And of course, you take your surf records with you at that point, and everybody would be like, what in the world is this guy?
Yeah. Did they have a record player in 1874?
Probably not. No, you'd have to take that too, I guess, obviously. But
I'll take my surf wax cylinders.
All right. So one thing we also like to ask people, would you like to hear a specific surf song for catching a wave?
We almost never play covers, and we've been learning a few covers because we're playing at Surfer Joe this summer in Livorno, Italy, and we're going to have some special guests up with us. So we've been learning some of the surf covers. One of them, which is one of my all-time favorite songs, is Baja by the Astronauts.
Man, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a killer. It's amazing.
And do you have a request for Boppin' with Beth? Now, Boppin' with Beth is multi-genre, so it can be absolutely anything except for rap, hip-hop, or techno, because techno is a heck no from me.
I don't think I could give you any 3 songs for those 3 genres anyway. That's like fire in my eardrums. I tell you what, they call them a Toronto band, but they're actually from Hamilton. They were out in the late 70s. They were a band that should have been huge, and they just kept on running into the worst luck. So it's a band called Teenage Head, and the song is called Picture My Face.
Very cool. I'm going to have to do some research on that, but I dig it already.
If you like the Ramones and the Shaking Groovies and all that kind of stuff, you'll love Teenage Head. They're just really one of the best bands Canada's ever produced. And just every time they got some momentum, something terrible would happen. So it's unfortunate. They should have been as big as any band in the late 70s. They're absolutely fantastic.
Now, as for Mark Malibu and the Wasagas, where can people go to find out information on you guys?
Of course, we have a Facebook page like the rest of the world. There's also www.wasagas.com. That's our website where you can see pictures and get some information about us and some little news items. We got an Instagram page, Wasaga_surf. And I think the first couple albums are on Spotify. I don't really put much stuff on Spotify. They can go make their money off of someone else.
We don't use it either. Well, Mark Malibu of Mark Malibu and the Wasagas, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
I will chat with both of you any day, any time of the day, any night.
We'll call you Christmas morning.
You know what? We don't really do presents, so that would be fine.
There you go. It'd be a present for you.